Cannabis could be a multi-trillion-dollar global industry, and hemp can be cheap to replace fossil fuels. Cannabis is overpriced, and the government actually gives the meat and oil industry an advantage in business. In a lot of areas with a demand for fruits and vegetables, there is a limited amount of farming. With the lack of hemp production, you can see how organic food prices are being kept high. All this time, organic food could actually be cheaper compared to non-organic food, which is grown with toxic pesticides that are linked to cancer or other health problems. So this could help save lives too. People could live longer lives eating healthier food that isn't grown with dangerous pesticides. With some farmers being paid not to farm, you can see that food prices are being kept high. So no wonder vegan food prices are high right now. Some of the organic prices are really expensive. I can't afford to eat all the organic food I want to. I don't want to have to buy non-organic food when I don't have the money. There is still a lot of phony activism completely undermining how hemp could be cheap to make food, energy, building materials, clothes, the stuff that is needed to rebuild places. Children do not need ID to buy meat, fish, candy, coffee. I mean, there's lots of freedom kids have. And adults are being tricked into getting ID for cannabis just because there's all sorts of fear-mongering, which reminds me of the reefer madness propaganda from almost a century ago. And there's all sorts of science that proves the fear-mongering is wrong and completely out of context. In countries around the world, people are overpaying for cannabis, and there is limited business in the cannabis industry. All this time, cannabis could be cheaper compared to meat without prohibition. People with cancer or other health problems are finding relief with cannabis. And there is science showing cannabinoids have anti-cancer effects. There are some people supporting corrupt government policy that ruins people's lives and prevents cannabis from being cheaper compared to meat. There are people trying to prevent fair competition and keep prices high. Meat products cause a lot of health problems. Heart disease is one of the biggest killers, and there are a lack of vegan restaurants that serve pizza and burgers with no meat, fish, or dairy. There are people trying to maintain limited business, which keeps prices high, and some people are trying to prevent the economy from growing. Cannabis could be legal for everyone without ID. Without cannabis prohibition, cannabis would be legal and nobody would be going to jail for growing plants that heal the environment. You know you're living in a sick society when people are free to kill and torture animals and not free to grow vegan hemp food. So I think with all the people counterproductive to how cannabis prohibition can come to an end, prohibition can still come to an end sooner than later. There is actually science that shows that cannabis helps protect the brain from damage. So a lot of people find cannabis great for headaches, pain relief, and all sorts of minor health problems, and a lot of serious health problems too. Some that people don't think anything can help with. There have been people that were told by doctors there's nothing else they could do, and then cannabis was able to provide relief, and even cure people and help people live longer lives. Around the world, a lot of people suffer from depression. Some people are having a hard time trying to cope and live their life, especially with the government keeping the cost of living high and trying to ruin people's lives with failed policy. And cannabis has been providing relief and helping a lot of people live normal lives, where before people were depressed and not able to function normally in society and be productive. So some people actually ignore how cannabis helps asthmatics breathe easier, even when there's science to back it up. You wouldn't want an asthmatic to go without an inhaler, would you? Cannabis oil is overpriced. Cannabis oil is a lot more medicinal when eaten compared to smoking. Most of the cannabis oil made today is not made properly and does not have the full range of cannabinoids that offer the full health benefits you can get from properly made cannabis oil. Some cannabinoids are destroyed past 250 degrees. Cannabis is really expensive. Lots of people have to limit how much cannabis they get. And most people can't afford to have all they want. Only a minority of people have been able to do that. There has been a weight loss solution ignored and downplayed. Cannabis has been helping people lose weight and live longer lives. Hemp seeds could be made cheap and abundant, so our civilization could prosper. Hemp seeds contain more protein by weight compared to meat or fish. And hemp seeds also contain one of the healthiest balances in nature with omega fatty acids. This is what hemp seed oil looks like. We can make biodiesel out of hemp seed oil. Unfortunately, hemp seed oil is really overpriced at this moment, so it's not cost effective for many businesses to use biodiesel from hemp, because there's cheaper alternatives right now. But eventually, things will change. So once the ban against cannabis comes to an end, hemp seed oil will become more abundant, not so limited. So the cost to make biodiesel will get cheaper. Many people don't know, the University of Connecticut were able to convert 97% of hemp seed oil into biodiesel. And their study found that hemp biodiesel actually burns at a lower temperature compared to other biodiesel on the market. So while other oils can kill you, hemp seed oil is actually safe. You can drink it, and it's actually healthy for you. In some places that legalized hemp, strains that produce more biomass are banned because they contain higher amounts of THC. And there's all sorts of fear-mongering about the THC and people trying to grow cannabis. I mean, it's just utter paranoia, and that's just nonsense. More people would eat hemp food if prices were cheaper. Don't you think kids deserve a future where fuels are made out of safe sources? Many cars and trucks could be made to run off of E85 ethanol or E100, which is 100% ethanol. Diesel cars and trucks could be using biodiesel. The ban against cannabis is bad for business. A long time ago, somebody came up with a dumb idea to ban cannabis and give the meat and oil industry an advantage in business. The fact that cannabis biomass can be converted into biodegradable energy goes to show how the ban against cannabis is bad for business, because it keeps the cost of energy and electricity high. People, businesses, and governments could save a lot of money if energy prices were cheaper. Many governments do not represent the people, and governments ignore what the people want and are counterproductive to how people can save money and have less taxes. We as a species can develop sustainable solutions so biodegradable energy can be cheap and abundant from hemp. Modern civilization as we know it grew off of cheap energy from fossil fuels, which are no longer cheap. Years have gone to waste from developing biodegradable energy and sustainable solutions to problems in this world. The cost of electricity is overpriced. All this time, prices could be cheaper with lots of hemp production. There are governments keeping the cost of electricity high and limiting how much electricity is being generated, so people pay more for electricity. All this time, hemp could be cheap to generate electricity and power cities, homes, and businesses. Some governments are generating electricity with nuclear energy. All this time, hemp can be cheap to replace nuclear and have cleaner energy. In Ontario, nuclear energy makes up for a large percentage of the electricity generated. Hemp can be made into pellets that actually burn cleaner compared to wood pellets. When providing energy to cities and other situations, hemp biomass is more reliable compared to solar, because biomass has a constant power on demand, and with technology, biomass can be burned clean, so less of an impact on the environment compared to solar energy, and actually have plants heal the environment. Nuclear radiation poses far too many risks, so people would be better off if hemp replaced nuclear energy instead of continued use of nuclear energy. There are some corrupt people trying to get nuclear energy generating electricity in the oceans. So if there was a disaster, it would be contaminated right into our ocean. The world demand for electricity and energy is going to grow. All this time, hemp can be cheap to replace nuclear energy and fossil fuels including coal, natural gas, petroleum, and other unsustainable forms of energy. For decades, the nuclear industry has been promoting nuclear as safe, and then there were environmental disasters after that. Solar and wind have got a lot of attention as alternative energy sources, and biomass has been downplayed. I personally think it's a waste how some people would want all cars and trucks to be electric and just forget about all of the millions of cars and trucks that run on gasoline and diesel and ignore the fact that they can run off biodegradable energy without sulfur and have cleaner energy. and then lots of plants to breathe in CO2, which you don't get with the oil and gas industry. The cost of energy has a really big impact on a lot of people's lives around the world. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that energy prices could be cheaper if hemp was in abundance and not limited. Many governments around the world rely on coal to generate electricity when hemp can replace coal. Hemp burns cleaner, so there are many benefits other than healing the environment. We can reduce the cost of energy as well. In a lot of places, the price of natural gas is really expensive to heat a home. All this time, the price of biogas could be cheap. Many buildings and homes are heated with natural gas when biogas burns cleaner. There is a lot of corruption preventing biogas from being cheap from hemp to sell to global markets. That would affect a lot of countries. If countries could buy cheaper biogas than the cost of natural gas, that would provide motivation for countries to develop sustainable solutions. Carbon taxing schemes and other carbon schemes basically undermine how lots of cannabis plants can heal the environment and breathe in CO2. When you look at the study at the university in Sweden, how hemp is good for biogas, then you can understand how many governments around the world are undermining how biogas can replace natural gas. There's lots of people who struggle to pay energy bills. All this time, government is literally preventing hemp biogas from being cheap and abundant. People really can't be afraid to be more open in society to talk about how, as a society, we're going to generate more electricity so the cost of electricity can be cheaper. There's a lot of corruption preventing electricity from being cheap and abundant. Hemp can be burned into clean energy, so electricity production does not have to be so limited. Many governments are preventing billions of dollars from being able to benefit the economy, and in some cases over $1 trillion every year could benefit economies. And global trade could increase at levels people would have never thought possible. There are people trying to get limited business with cannabis legalized and not end prohibition. If there were lots of small businesses competing in the cannabis industry with bigger businesses, that would make sure the big businesses couldn't just sell really high prices and not have to deal with competition and have cheaper prices. Why should others get an advantage in business? That's not fair. Why would politicians want to limit how much money can benefit the economy by either not allowing cannabis or taxing cannabis? Taxing cannabis would keep prices high and limit sales, which would limit how much money benefits the economy. It's simple economics. There is no tax on fruit and vegetables. Hustlers don't want cannabis to be cheap without prohibition, so people could save money. High prices limit the economy from growing, So the economy could be growing a lot more with cheaper prices and have a stronger economy. And then there could be more sales as well. If farmers were making $10 a pound for cannabis biomass, they would still be making a lot of money compared to other food crops. So there might be corporations that lobby to get limited business with cannabis legalized. Every year that goes by is another year that hemp could have been cheap and abundant to replace fossil fuels. Every day I'm at work, there is corrupt media spreading lies, undermining truth, and preventing support to end cannabis prohibition. Some media have an active invested interest in the meat industry or oil companies and stuff like that. When you compare cannabis to fruits and vegetables sold in a grocery store, you can see how cannabis is overpriced and there is limited business. Lots of people around the world want to be free to grow cannabis indoors or outdoors. Gangs and cartels influence politics to keep the ban against cannabis, so people aren't free to grow all the cannabis plants they want. Cartels benefit from government's plan to not allow people to be free to grow all the cannabis plants they want and keep limited business and high prices. The last thing the gangs and cartels want are cheap prices without prohibition. Millions of people around the world are dying of health problems which cannabis helps with. Cannabis is actually safer compared to vaccines, because vaccines actually do kill some people. So millions of lives could be saved every year. Then there's the fact that a lot of people are going hungry. All this time, organic hemp food could be cheap and abundant. Some families struggle just to put food on the plate to feed their family. So every year, millions of people are dying of cancer. Then there's millions more dying of other health problems. Then there's millions more dying from starvation. There's a lot of people dying around the world. All this time, solutions exist. Everyone could be free to grow cannabis if people supported the truth. It wouldn't take very long for some countries to be energy independent and completely replace fossil fuels before 2025. It doesn't matter how much corruption there is, people could still be free to grow cannabis indoors or outdoors. If superior hemp building materials were cheap and abundant, then people could build places to grow cannabis indoors and not have a problem with mold. Cannabis plants are great for creating oxygen and breathing in CO2 to heal the environment. So with all the homes powered by natural gas, you would think that government would care if lots of cannabis plants could breathe in CO2 and heal the environment. But government is actually keeping the cost of living high and undermining solutions we have. With all the pollution from fossil fuels, everybody should care if hemp is cheaper than meat to make biodegradable energy, not just food or medicine. Because of the war on drugs, many drugs get contaminated and mixed with dangerous substances. So the adulterated market is just out of control. And it wouldn't be like that if prices were cheap, because there would be motivation to not cut the product. Because it would cost money to cut something instead of the raw cost. So if drugs were actually cheaper than the substances they get cut with, then it would actually be safer for people. There is still phony activism that undermine how cannabis can solve problems. Seriously, every day that goes by is another day that cannabis could have been healing the environment, growing healthy food, medicine, fiber. So millions of people are dying around the world because some people want healthy food banned without any science to actually back it up. With so much pollution from fossil fuels, you would honestly think that more people would care if biodegradable energy is cheap and abundant. Big money interests and oil cartels don't want people to be free to grow cannabis and have hemp replace fossil fuels. Poison industries are getting an advantage in a lot of countries against cannabis. Petroleum has been used to make a lot of products around the world. Everything from tires to plastics to fuels. And pretty much everything made with petroleum can be made with hemp, which is biodegradable. I have asthma, and corrupt people don't want everybody to be free to grow cannabis. Cannabis plants help create oxygen and heal the environment. The government could be made to work for the people. There is a lot of inequality in society, and government is against how the cost to raise children could be cheaper without the ban on cannabis. The ban against cannabis was created a long time ago by corrupt people against science and biased towards the meat industry and other industries that pollute the planet like the fossil fuel industry. Even though a lot of people live in fear, cannabis is actually safer compared to water. If you study the number of deaths per year, cannabis is by far safer compared to water. It's just most people don't drink enough water to die. Many politicians believe in myths about cannabis, which are as good as fairy tales, meaning the myths are nonsense, complete fabrications, made-up stories. Cannabis is safer than driving a car or a truck? So with schools downplaying a vegan diet, you can see that many people do not have a proper education about diet. Somehow, people don't know how hemp seeds have more protein compared to meat or fish by weight. When I was in school, there were hamburgers for sale, cheeseburgers, vending machines with all sorts of candy, chocolate bars, chips, yet no hemp food. It's kind of strange schools didn't properly inform students about hemp food. The ban against cannabis promotes inequality in society. That's really unfair. Governments are intentionally scamming taxpayers and ignoring solutions so people can save money. You might have heard some media or people say tax the rich. Did you know that overtaxing rich people is actually bad for the lower and middle classes? Because it means rich people have less money, which means less money to hire people for work, which means less jobs, and money going into the economy. So next time you hear somebody say something similar to tax the rich, you might want to mention this. Many have a hard time paying bills and rely on help to get food. All this time government prevents food from being cheap and abundant. Many cities around the world can have a lot more jobs, economic growth, and money benefiting the economy without cannabis prohibition. Cannabis plants heal the environment, provide healthy food, medicine, fiber for building materials and clothes, and energy including biofuels and biogas. You should care if cities have more economic growth and business with lots of cannabis plants. There are actually people against the economy being able to grow with lots of cannabis plants that breathe in CO2 and heal the environment. People shouldn't have to overpay for cannabis that is overpriced. All this time cannabis prices could be cheaper. There doesn't have to be limited business. It's very strange how some people in society are against the economy growing more with lots of cannabis plants. Some people don't seem to care about equality. So everybody could be living in better living conditions. Many homes are overpriced. All this time, hemp could be cheap to make biodegradable building materials that are of better quality. We have solutions so biodegradable building materials can be cheap and abundant. Hempcrete is fireproof and a better solution compared to concrete in many applications. With basements, hempcrete has reportedly not been doing so well with strength and structure. So hemp plastic, which is stronger than steel, might provide a sustainable solution to that to help give it more structure. So then the hempcrete is more acting just for show. Many buildings and homes are not made out of biodegradable building materials. So you got corrupt society against how everyone can be living in better living conditions. It's obvious the construction industry is making some effort to go more green, except there are still a lot of building materials used that are not biodegradable. All this time hemp could be cheap and abundant to make superior quality products. That means better quality doesn't have to cost more. If you don't know what hempcrete is, it's basically a hemp version of concrete, and it's very useful. So hemp is really good for insulating homes and buildings, And hempcrete is a very good solution to replace concrete in many applications. Hempcrete isn't reportedly so good in basements on its own, so there may be ways to develop hempcrete to be used in basements, used with other solutions as well. The fact that biodegradable plastic made from hemp is stronger than steel goes to show that we could develop sustainable construction building materials with hemp, and not just hempcrete or other building materials from hemp. There's actually a whole lot of different things we can develop. So hempcrete is not only fireproof, it's really good with heating and cooling, so it's good for insulating. So you need less heat to keep a place warm, and you can maintain a cool temperature without AC in some cases. People's homes could be powered by biodegradable energy, and many people can get their homes self-sufficient. Many homeowners have enough land where they could grow hemp and not have to pay for electricity or heat. Some cities in North America and other parts of the world have more homicides every year compared to troops in the military killed in some war zones. If police weren't wasting resources going after non-violent people for cannabis and illegal drugs, then police could have more resources to go after violent criminals and thieves. There are many unsolved murders and crimes. All this time, resources are being wasted on failed policy that bans cannabis, while meat products cause harm. Without prohibition, the cost of living could be cheaper. Then police could have more money to investigate murders and other serious crimes. If biodegradable energy was cheap, then it's possible that violent crimes might go down, because people might be poisoned from fossil fuels. The homicide rate in the United States is one of the highest in the modern industrial world. According to the FBI, some of the worst cities in the United States are Chicago, New York, and Baltimore. Some of the worst cities in Canada were Thunder Bay, Winnipeg, and Halifax. Crime rates in Toronto are not as high as some other cities. Big money interests don't want truth movement, so everybody could be free to grow cannabis. There's a lot of corrupt media ignoring and downplaying information. So you can see there are a lot of media companies that promoted meat and helped the meat industry grow and downplayed a vegan diet. So you might honestly think that with all the problems in the world and some media promoting the meat industry and downplaying a vegan diet, that more media would be part of the solution to not downplay a vegan diet. Some rich people have investments in meat and don't want cannabis to be cheaper. Don't you think there might be a conflict of interest? Some media have investments in the oil and meat industry and against how hemp can replace fossil fuels. So I'm basically going up against the biggest, most powerful corporations in the world. With so much money and influence, they can buy media companies, and who's gonna know better? Oil companies own solar and wind companies, so who do you think benefits from downplaying how hemp can replace fossil fuels? Some people are promoting wind and solar and downplaying biodegradable energy. There are a lot more people in society that recognize that cannabis prohibition is not working and it needs to come to an end. Sooner than later, too. There are more people that are stopping their use of pharmaceutical drugs and switching to natural medicines. We could eliminate hunger, so there would be no more hungry people, especially if hemp was cheap and abundant. Then people would be kind to give away free food. There's so much phony activism that undermine how hemp food can be cheap and abundant to feed hungry people. I mean, just think about the number of charities and fundraisers trying to get money to help hungry people, just based off that. And there's other issues like homelessness. So there's people actually trying to solve the issue of homelessness by downplaying how hemp building materials can be cheap and abundant. That's not going to work very well, if you ask me. That's kind of insane. The government's solution to the housing crisis is ignoring and undermining how hemp building materials can be cheap and abundant to build new homes and apartments made out of biodegradable building materials. That would create so many new jobs. Banning cannabis is one of the stupidest things you could do. Banning one of the healthiest food sources on the planet? I mean, our civilization is supposed to survive and not try and ban healthy food from being cheap. So people might actually be able to reduce their costs on food, eating a vegan diet with hemp seeds. Lots of people have tried different diets, so people end up spending more money sometimes. People could actually save money with hemp and spend less. And be healthier. And just imagine if hemp prices got cheaper. That would be more motivational for people to eat a vegan diet with hemp. The ban against cannabis is preventing progress in science. There are a lot of different health problems that cannabis helps with, and for each one of those health problems, there are different charities and fundraisers that get lots of donations and undermine how cannabis heals sick people. Doesn't anybody think there's something very wrong with that? Just think about the number of people that could have been getting relief and help with cannabis, and didn't. So there has been a lot of fear-mongering about economic collapse over the years. A lot of people promote the idea of an economic collapse as imminent, and some people are preparing for collapse. If collapse is real or not, what are people doing undermining solutions we have? Michael Rupert, who was in the movie Collapse, committed suicide. That's no joke. That's human life. People should care about human life. I mean, we could prevent suicides. There's no reason for people to live in fear and downplay solutions. I've found there are many cancer fundraisers that raise millions of dollars for cancer and ignore science of the anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids. And it's not like there's one article or anything. There's actually a lot of science compounded over the years and decades. So cannabis is actually providing relief to people who have cancer. So all these millions being raised for cancer and cancer research, you really have to question where it goes. And you have to question chemotherapy, because chemotherapy is known not to be 100%. A lot of people have actually died because of chemotherapy. So if a safer solution exists, who in their right mind would slow progress to research? There are corrupt people and politicians who don't want hemp to be cheap, which can replace fossil fuels. Many years have been wasted and suppressed. Many people can't afford to travel on an airplane and visit a lot of places around the world. Aircraft could be using biodegradable energy. Jet aircraft have already been tested with biofuels. Quality cars and trucks can be made with hemp. Hemp plastic has been shown to be stronger than steel. There is a myth that some people believe about human overpopulation, and people ignore solutions to help save lives. Lots of people are undermining how hemp can be cheap and abundant to provide healthy food, medicine, building materials, energy. Lots of land can be turned into arable land, good for growing food crops. So people who are against cannabis plants healing the environment and believe there's too many people on the planet are out of touch with reality. Some countries in the world still execute people for cannabis? That's a human rights issue. Yet there's lots of corrupt politicians that turn a blind eye. So you have insane laws that ban healthy food. All this time meat products cause health problems, which cannabis helps with. If enough people support the truth movement, then cannabis can be cheaper compared to meat, and everyone can be free to grow cannabis. The government actually discourages people from growing cannabis seeds, which could help feed hungry people. Many more states in the United States have legalized cannabis for recreational or medicinal use. Progress to end cannabis prohibition should not be held back in favor of legalizing limited business. Cannabis used to be legal. The only reason it was made illegal was because corrupt people were against science and decided to ban cannabis and ask questions later. Kind of like shooting first and asking questions later. But it's not very smart. Every day there are a lot of people and a lot of media distracting people how cannabis can be cheaper than meat. And hemp can replace fossil fuels, make the cost of energy and electricity cheaper. Every day. This isn't something to pass off. There's actually something to research here. You can see some media have actually been making effort, while other media have actually been promoting the oil industry and the meat industry. So with some media promoting the oil industry and the meat industry, you have to really ask more questions. So there are still people and cannabis activists that downplay how hemp food is superior to meat. And there's lots of people trying to get limited business with cannabis legalized and not end prohibition. All this time cannabis could be cheaper compared to meat. Yet there's lots of people against that. And there could actually be more people that want cannabis to be cheaper than meat. It's just not many have supported the truth movement yet, and other people have been getting more support trying to get limited business legalized and not end prohibition. You got lots of media that talk about legalization, and then some people get people in the trap of legalization versus decriminalization and ignore the fact that we can just end prohibition, and that would make cannabis legal for everybody with no ID. And cannabis could be sold in a supermarket just like any other food. After years of studying information, I have come to the conclusion there is a fake truth movement downplaying how hemp can be cheap and abundant to replace fossil fuels and solve a lot of other problems. There's no other explanation. There's actually people that believe that they're part of a truth movement and they downplay how cannabis saves lives. Now, if anybody's pretending to be part of a truth movement and downplaying how cannabis saves lives, let alone how hemp can replace fossil fuels, that is proof of a fake truth movement. I mean, at some point, when people are informed of information and still ignore the truth and ignore science, that's fake. When people don't know, they don't know. So corrupt politicians really don't care if cannabis heals sick people. Many politicians ignore science, how cannabis heals sick people. A lot of governments are downplaying their plan to grow the economy. There's so many politicians that undermine how more jobs can be created. Countless politicians support animal abuse, how the meat industry torture and abuse animals, and not how vegan hemp food can be cheap and abundant, and to replace fossil fuels with hemp. Lucky for us, we have solutions so organic vegan food can be cheap and abundant. There are governments around the world that give the meat and oil industry an advantage in business, along with other poison industries that cause damage to the environment. And governments undermine solutions so vegan food can be cheap and abundant, and people could be a lot healthier eating vegan food. People have a choice they can make to live a longer, healthier life eating a vegan diet. Just because the government undermines a vegan diet and gives the meat industry an advantage doesn't mean that you should make an unhealthy choice. So I've noticed some people who eat meat are very aggressive to people who don't eat meat and very soft to people who eat meat and support animal abuse. You shouldn't make an unhealthy choice and eat meat just because others do. Just because there's some people trying to put people down for being vegan doesn't mean that you have to go along with it. Eventually people will think it's uncool to put people down for talking about veganism and caring about a vegan diet. So the meat industry is worse than the tobacco industry with pollution. Yet many laws are biased against smoking. Many people stop buying resources that come from conflict zones. So this applies too, because animals have rights. So not only can people live longer, healthier lives eating a vegan diet, but you can reduce the amount of animals that get tortured and abused on this planet. Everybody can make a difference in this world. And supporting the meat industry is directly supporting animal abuse, if you like it or not. Because killing animals is a form of animal abuse. So there was a company in Ontario selling food to grocery stores, which was selling certified organic chicken, which wasn't actually certified organic. So there's a lot of fraud and deception. And not only that, but the claims of cruelty-free meat have to be questioned, because if the fraud is taking place with the false claims of organic, obviously there's false claims about animal abuse, because people like to lie to cover up what happened. Eating meat may very well be responsible for making some species on this planet extinct. And there's still more species that are on the verge of going extinct. Our oceans desperately need to be healed. And hemp can play a part, because hemp can absorb toxins, so the fish don't. And then people end up eating those fish with the poisons in them and get health problems. Scientists have found cancerous tumors in fish. The government is undermining how there would be a lot of jobs in construction and other industries that would grow without cannabis prohibition. Power outages could be a thing of the past if hemp was cheap and abundant to make electricity prices cheap. We can generate clean electricity from hemp. There are many different processes, even just burning the biomass. We have technology, so we can have low carbon emitting hemp biomass, generating clean electricity. And then there's other technology as well. There are a lot of people that protest oil companies and hydraulic fracturing. All this time, hemp can be cheap and abundant to make biodegradable energy. So hydraulic fracturing could be a thing of the past. And people could study history wondering why people gave energy companies an advantage in business against how biodegradable energy can be cheap and abundant. You can't expect oil and gas companies to care if hemp is cheap to replace fossil fuels. Some oil and gas companies are owned by governments. And governments prevent hemp from being cheap to replace fossil fuels. Every year, there are many people who protest corrupt government. If it's a real protest, if it's an online protest, there are many protests against corrupt governments. First Nation communities in Canada, along with others, have protested Canada's toxic tar sands and pipelines. There are oil spills all over the place. They've been going into drains and sewers. So the government is actually preventing the cost to clean up oil spills from getting cheaper. Developing cheap, biodegradable energy can prevent the oil industry from destroying the environment and prevent our fresh water from being contaminated with oil and other dangerous toxic chemicals. If biodegradable energy was cheap, then we could prevent oil spills from ever happening in the Arctic and all over the world. One of the biggest failures of our society is denying the chance to replace fossil fuels. And the slow progress is not good enough. It can't keep up with the change that's happening in society. The oil industry is going to keep developing and polluting the environment until biodegradable energy is developed to replace fossil fuels. Cannabis could help clean up some of our freshwater lakes and rivers. Everybody should care that we can prevent our fresh water from being contaminated with toxic fossil fuels. There are actually people promoting to have a global carbon tax or even a carbon tax. That's crazy, and people are downplaying how cannabis plants can breathe in CO2. The cost of energy is overpriced. All this time, we have solutions to develop cleaner energy without the use of fossil fuels. The carbon tax is a huge scam, and governments are undermining how lots of cannabis plants can breathe in CO2. Every year, many cannabis plants are destroyed. The ban on cannabis has caused a lot of destruction to the environment. With many countries around the world agreeing to lower their CO2 levels and get rid of fossil fuels, the demand for renewable energy is growing. So hemp should be cheap and abundant to keep up with the demand for renewable energy. Lots of countries can be energy independent with biodegradable energy from hemp, and then solar and wind would also contribute some energy, but biodegradable energy from hemp is more useful than solar and wind in many applications. So you got big money interests that take advantage of the situation and keep people distracted from useful information that can make a difference. Many governments have intentionally been careless and kept electricity prices high. So government has been making sure people pay more for electricity. Many countries around the world could be completely converted to biodegradable energy before 2030. Some countries could be energy independent before 2025. There have been people converting animal waste products like animal fats and oils into energy like biofuels. All this time, hemp burns cleaner. Solar and wind do not have plants breathing in CO2, like how with biomass there is a demand for plants to breathe in CO2, which is a sustainable cycle. And then solar and wind also produce pollution. There's so many politicians against lots of plants healing the environment. Cannabis plants heal the environment. Over the decades, the ban against cannabis has shown to be very destructive to human life. Cannabis plants help heal poisoned land, and falling leaves help replenish nutrients in the soil. Some strains of hemp can produce 10 tons of biomass per acre. Cannabis plants actually grow well without pesticides. The ban against cannabis affects everybody in society. Even if somebody doesn't smoke weed and doesn't eat cannabis and tries to reject the plant as much as they can, the ban against cannabis affects their life if they like it or not, because it keeps the cost of living high. With cheaper prices, there could be cheaper energy that would affect a lot of people's lives. Many years have gone by that corrupt society has prevented development of cheap biodegradable energy from hemp. Energy prices and electricity prices could have already been cheaper. And people are ignoring truth, even to this day. The government is actually giving the meat and fishing industry an advantage in business, torturing and abusing animals? Politicians shouldn't let the meat industry or the oil industry get in the way of doing their jobs. Hemp is one of the oldest food sources in human history. It has a significant part of our history. Many people can't afford to spend a whole lot of money at the casino. The global economy does not have to be rigged to give the meat, oil, and gas industries an advantage in business against how biodegradable energy can be cheap. Far too many years have gone to waste from developing cheap biodegradable energy with hemp. The years don't have to go on like this. We can do something. Many governments are counterproductive to how biodegradable energy can be cheap from hemp, and people could be saving money. We shouldn't wait until things get worse to share the truth. We seriously do not need an oil disaster in our oceans again, like the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Around the world, millions of barrels of oil are spilled into the ocean. Oil and gas exploration do not have plants breathing in CO2, like how with cannabis plants there are lots of plants that breathe in CO2. So if energy is made from hemp, there are lots of plants to breathe in the CO2. And you don't get that with the oil and gas. You actually don't get that with nuclear or coal and a lot of other unsustainable energy sources. Some countries are dictatorships, and governments control people's lives with fraud and give some an advantage. And some people are left to die by their own governments. Do you really think communist dictatorships and other socialist governments want people to be free to grow cannabis? Corrupt governments do not want people to be free to grow cannabis and give the meat industry an advantage, along with the oil industry and other poison industries. Do you really want children breathing toxic fossil fuels? All this time energy could be biodegradable? The government shouldn't undermine how many lives can be saved around the world. Even by making a difference in one place, it can help affect other parts of the world. Private companies actually worked with public schools to help job seekers find jobs in the oil industry, which could be obsolete. Lots of money will have to be invested into the current toxic infrastructure with energy to maintain it. All this time, it would be cheaper in the long term and possibly the short term to just invest in renewable energy and allow renewable energy to develop. Lots of people are counterproductive to how biodegradable energy can be cheap, and people give the oil industry an advantage with the toxic tar sands and hydraulic fracturing. All this time we get cleaner energy from hemp. There is a lot of wasteland, and many acres can be restored into arable land good for growing food. Meat products have been linked to many health problems, including cancer. There are science studies showing that meat causes cancer. Many people are actually surprised to find out that cannabis is actually non-addictive. People are able to smoke weed and not get withdrawal symptoms and feel like they need it. We have never been closer to ending cannabis prohibition. More people than ever know about how cannabis has medical benefits. Before, there was fear-mongering, and there wasn't a lot of science that there is today. Most of the electricity around the world is generated from poisonous energy sources that are not biodegradable. And the cost of electricity is really expensive in a lot of areas. Some cities don't have a lot of places for people to rent, and prices are kept high. Many buildings need repairs, and some places are actually falling apart, while some people complain about the living conditions. Like many products, technology can be really overpriced, and you're really just paying for a brand name. That's why many people build custom PCs, including myself. I love building my own computers. I can save money and build a faster computer. The mafia and organized crime have investments in the meat industry and real estate, and are against how cannabis can be cheap without prohibition. A lot of governments are wasting taxpayers' money, and in a lot of cases money goes missing. Organized crime don't want cannabis to be cheaper than meat. You got criminals that don't want drugs to be cheap and abundant, and they don't want cannabis to be cheaper than meat. You got gangs trying to limit competition and keep prices high. Some people are paying $10 a gram for cannabis. All this time, cannabis could be $10 a pound. Often you might hear governments say they're going to fight organized crime and criminals, yet governments undermine how cannabis could be cheaper than meat without prohibition. Obviously, there would be a lot more money to investigate criminals that steal, cause damage to people and property without cannabis prohibition. And every single day that goes by is another day that the government is keeping the cost of living high and preventing cannabis from being cheaper than meat. There's lots of schemes people have to try and get limited business legalized and not end prohibition. Organized crime benefit from the ban on cannabis. There are gangs that don't want people to be free to grow cannabis. Many drugs are overpriced. Some gangs, cartels, and criminal organizations make more money than some governments around the world. And prohibition fuels organized crime because it keeps prices high and limits competition. With all the corruption and bribery that used to happen with organized crime back in the early 1900s, some people actually wonder if the organized crime were the ones that got cannabis banned. Because alcohol prohibition was working so well for organized crime, they might have been looking to put their hands into anything they could. The movie Goodfellas is actually based off of somebody in real life called Henry Hill. And there were experiences very similar to what was shown in the movie. That's actually how they acted. Prohibition gave rise to ruthless gangsters like Al Capone, who led the Chicago Outfit. And many other criminal organizations are still active today. People don't have to feel helpless. We have solutions to actually do things to make this world a better place. Even by starting to grow hemp plants that breathe in CO2. Or the multiple other uses. Taxes take up for a large percent of people's income. And this can be drastically reduced. This obviously affects a lot of people. I have asthma, and I can smell the horrible smell of the petroleum-based gasoline and diesel fuel. It smells horrible. And when biodiesel trucks drive by, they don't bother me. So we have solutions. Just because there's a lot of corruption undermining how biodegradable energy can be cheap, doesn't mean biodegradable energy can't be cheap and abundant if people work together to share the truth. I turned 30 years old this year, and I've had a bad experience with an online dating website. So I spent many years looking for a girlfriend on the online dating website POF, and I've had a lot of my time wasted. Like, that's my life. The years just went by. I'm 30 years old now. So while other people get a lot of responses and go on a lot of dates and sleep with a lot of girls actually rarely respond to me looking for a relationship. I mean, I send a lot of messages and I rarely even get a response, especially about a relationship. I mean, I rarely go on dates. I would love to have a girlfriend, eventually get married, and have family one day. While people live their lives as normal every day, some people struggle to pay bills, some people struggle to feed themselves, some people are suffering and dying from health problems. The cost of living could be cheaper and help save people's lives and make a difference. We can all make a difference. Over the decades, Hollywood has spread a lot of myths about cannabis and spread a lot of fear-mongering. So the cost to make movies could actually be cheaper. When you consider the costs of transportation for making big-budget movies, cheaper prices with energy would allow for cheaper movies. So some people might be driving their cars or trucks and have no idea that their car could be powered by biodegradable energy and save money. There's a lot of elitism undermining how vegan food can be cheap. The cost of space travel might be overpriced, except we can develop cheaper space travel, so more people could afford to travel in space, and not just a limited amount of people. We have solutions to develop cheaper space travel. Cannabis might help with space sickness, because astronauts who go into space get health problems, and some of those health problems are health problems that cannabis helps with. Cannabis could provide relief. For years now, solutions to replace fossil fuels with hemp have been ignored and downplayed. So every year that goes by is another year that cars could have been running off of biodegradable energy. People could talk to politicians about ending cannabis prohibition. With all the problems around the world, we need a peaceful revolution. We have solutions so the economy can grow.